Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Parker Emerald,
And I'm Sean Briscombe.
and this is the Conversation Station. Before we really get into some really interesting things here with Sean, I gotta tell you guys a little bit about him because I went to look him up today so I could give him a really good introduction, and I looked him up, and you just see everything. He was a diver a while ago, and now he did 20 years of financial services. And most recently, he wrote a book called The Truth About Taxes. Do you want to just start off and tell him a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of the joke is that the book really isn't about taxes as much as it is about my journey and my family's journey of discovering this little known black box secret of the wealthiest families. And the secret is how they keep their tax dollars and grow that wealth and leave it to their family through trusts and foundations and a whole network of different business structures. And they're able to do that from generation to generation to generation and grow their wealth into perpetuity. So when you see these families like the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, the Vanderbilts, and those well-known families, as well as today, where you see things like the Trumps, the Bushes, the Clintons, everybody, the Romneys, those families, those wealthy families, they all use this specific type of structure. And I just discovered it through, a journey where my wife and I, when we first got married, let me take a step back. I grew up in California. I was a diver at a really young age. I was a springboard and platform diver. I competed and traveled and trained with the national team for a long time. And so when I was 14, I moved away from home to go train with the Olympic team at the time down in Southern California in Mission Viejo, with Greg Louganis and the whole Olympic team at the time. And then I went to college and ended up in Austin, Texas, training with the Olympic coach at the University of Texas. And so I just made Austin my home. I loved it here and have been here ever since. And after diving, I went to go work for Dell Computer, who was, computer company in Austin, Texas. And during that time, it was really growing. And it was a publicly traded company, which meant that they were giving us stock options and we were getting really, really good money, but we were also getting these huge bonuses that were in Dell stock. And I didn't know anything about money or finance at all. I just was working and making as much money as I could and just kept saving as much as I could. I was a single guy. I traveled a lot and had fun, but I found myself at the ripe old age of like 29 years old with over $1 million and thinking, I've made it, right? I mean, isn't that the dream, is to retire with $1 million or to be a millionaire, right? And it was all in Dell stock and options and stuff. So I ended up selling it all, not knowing anything about what I was doing. And as soon as I did that, it triggered a big tax, right? You got to pay tax on that stuff. And that was kind of my first wake up call. I was like, oh my gosh, because a big chunk of that money just gets taken away by the government. And that was kind of my first aha moment where I was like, man, I got to figure out a different game, a different way to do this.
Well, yeah. I mean, taxes are brutal. And it's when you've got that money where it's like, I feel like a millionaire is this title that's almost held like so high in our society.
Yeah.
But then the second you get it and you're like, yeah, I'm going to cash out.
Right.
Now you're left with like way less money than you started. And you're like, I shouldn't have cashed all of that out.
Yeah. And when you think about how expensive things are today, like houses and just living expenses, if you even have rent's going up and up and up, right? Food's getting more and more expensive. Gas for your car is ridiculously expensive right now. All of that stuff, when you have just $1 million and the government wants to take their chunk, Uncle Sam wants his portion, and then you're left with a lot less and everything's more expensive, it doesn't last very long. And so this image of retiring rich or becoming a millionaire. It's, because of certain things that are happening in our economy, that is no longer sufficient, as crazy as that sounds. In today's world, you need probably 6 times that amount of money to really retire comfortably.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And it's so crazy because it's like for so long, it was just get that million. If you get $1 million, you'll be fine. And now it's like, oh, no. You're not even halfway there.
No,
you gotta do a lot more.
And so everybody's faced with these 2 challenges. One, either you work longer, like till you're 100, right? Which is one of the things that point, people are having to do.
I mean, you're basically dead there.
Right.
There's no more retirement.
Or you sacrifice today and don't do anything fun and just save as much as you can, knowing that it's going to just cost so much more money when you want to retire. Right. And so that's the mindset of everybody today. And so when I went through that, I call it these cycles where you make a bunch of money and then you lose it and then you make it and then you lose it. And it kind of feels like you're just going in a circle and doing these cycles. That was my first cycle. After I made that money, I invested it in a startup company. And at the time it was, during the .com boom, and everybody was spending millions of dollars on those domain names. Yeah. Like in Austin, especially, it was just going crazy, and people were just investing in these companies and throwing money at new companies that weren't even, they had no product and no way to make money, but they were just getting all of these investors on board. It was crazy. We had a really good idea. We had the very first online shopping mall. It was essentially Amazon, but back then. And it was incredible. It was a great idea. So we started this company. We ended up selling it to what they call a venture capital firm, which is just a big investment company that invests in startup companies. And at the time, it was just software and technology startups. So this company came in and bought us. And there we were, 5 guys, really young, with about roughly $5 million each. And we were like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
First it was 1, then I grew it to 5, right around 5. And we're sitting there going, man, this is incredible. Again, not knowing what we were doing, just getting lucky. Yeah. And so we said, we were talking one day and we were like, what should we do next? We had this great idea to create a new software that was going to be able to be put into every single server that was out there. It was like a little automated bot software that was basically Google, where it would search and respond and give you ranked results based on your own criteria, different criteria for whatever Google. You wanted to do. Yeah, basically Google. And so, but at the time it wasn't really a search engine. It was more just like a little bot that was probing the internet at the time. So it was kind of unique.
Yeah, a primitive Google.
Yeah, primitive Google. So that was the next big idea. And we were going to 10x our returns, right? Those were the buzzwords back in the day. We were just going to multiply what we had made times 10. And we were 100% convinced that it was going to work. And so we just pushed all of our chips into the middle. We doubled down and invested everything we had just made. I didn't do the smart thing and take some off the table and save some money, because why would I do that? I'm going to 10x my returns, right?
Easy.
And so
no worries.
Being young and dumb and not knowing what I was doing and cocky and arrogant, here we were, 5 guys, and we started a new company right when the .com bubble burst, right when the whole thing was done. And so our investors at the time, we called them and said, hey, we need another round of funding to keep the company going so that we could keep going and bring the product to market and sell it. And they were like, nope, we're done. No more money. And we were like, what? Jeez. We ended up having to shut our doors. We had 50 employees we had to lay off. It was horrible. We lost everything.
Dang.
And so you go from these highs of, you feel like you've conquered the world. You're young, you're driving fast cars, you're living in awesome houses. You've got cash to spend all day long, to travel, to do whatever you want to do. And then all of a sudden something gets yanked out from underneath you and it all comes crashing down. And so the
Yeah.
challenge then is, what do you do next?
But then you also got to figure out when you're on those highs, how do you keep your money going up without just getting stuck in the chain again?
Exactly. How do you stop that repetitive cycling, where you can, because that you can, I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast too, in your mind and in your heart, you've got the skills to grow something really, really big, which is awesome. But here's the challenge. If that's true, if it's worth growing to the size that you have in your head, then it's worth protecting too. It's not worth growing it if it's not worth protecting it, Totally. And that's what I didn't understand at the time, because I had this mindset that it was just going to go on forever,
Yeah.
But what happens is everything happens in cycles. And if you can understand those cycles, then you can create safety and protection along the way as you're growing your wealth,
Totally.
So
yeah.
That became the game for me to figure out. I was like, I got to figure out this game. I got out of the internet game and got into real estate lending and investing just like everybody else did, right? When real estate was booming. And then the same thing happened. I made a bunch of money in a real estate lending and investing company. And then when the real estate market crashed, we lost it all again, So it was these two big cycles, the internet boom and then the real estate boom.
That's insane.
And that was enough for me to go, okay, I've got to stop this insanity. I've got to figure out, how do I protect and preserve what I've got? And there's got to be a different game, because I had friends at the time that were hedge fund managers and, doing really, really well in financial services. And I was keeping in touch with them and hanging out with them. And I was just like, what are you doing? Like, how do you have your stuff structured? How are you not, making money and losing money and making money and losing money all the time? And so eventually I pestered them enough to where they just, they basically kind of opened the kimono and kind of showed me what they were doing. And that's when I discovered that there are two completely different systems out there. One that the wealthy elite use and one that everybody else uses.
Dang, that's just a crazy story.
Yeah, that's what this book is about, The Truth About Taxes. It's about how the wealthy elite play a completely different game and have access to a completely different business structure and completely different rules of the game for taxes as well. Okay? And that's the key.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So when you see these families that just have massive amounts of wealth that are passed down from generation to generation, and you're like, how is that possible when everybody dies? The government takes 50% of your stuff through estate taxes, right? How would that be possible? Wouldn't the Hilton family be penniless at this, or in every single divorce, for example, when the husband and wife get divorced, they divide everything 50-50, right? Well, wouldn't the Kennedy family be completely bankrupt? Starting with Joe Kennedy all the way down.
Yeah.
I mean, how is it that they're able to not just keep their money, but grow their wealth from generation to generation and seemingly all tax free, right?
Totally.
They don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
That was the key. And that's kind of what I was at the time when the second cycle hit. I had just gotten married and my wife and I had gotten pregnant, and we had lost our first child, our daughter, Charlie. And it just crushed us. Right. But out of that pain, we had some friends at church that were getting their foster care license. And so they said, hey, why don't you give it a shot? Maybe that's God's way of building your family up. You never know. And so we just jumped in and decided to do that and became foster parents. And immediately, as soon as we started fostering kids, that's when everything shifted. And I started thinking, okay, this is what we were meant to do, was to help these kids that don't have families, right? That don't have hope. They literally feel like they don't belong anywhere. That they're worthless to society. Their own mother didn't even want them. That's the story that's in their head. Why would anybody want me? My own mother didn't even want me, And
Yeah.
that kind of trauma and abuse and neglect, what it does is it wires your brain for survival, basically. You disconnect from relationships, you disconnect from what's going on around you, and you're just constantly in survival mode. Where your lizard brain, your limbic system is just constantly scanning for threats. That's how these kids operate all the time. And so when you see that kid in school that's struggling to sit in his chair and just is disrupting the class constantly and just trying to get attention, it's that trauma in the brain. That's what's happening. It's a reaction. It's that fight or flight response kicking in,
Yeah, totally.
And so we started helping these kiddos. And as we were helping them, I realized if we really want to help them in a major way, like, any good entrepreneur, I don't like to do anything small. I like to make it really go big or go home. Right.
Yeah.
And so I started really exploring. I was like, how did these other people do it where they have their own foundations? Right. That was the starting point for me. How do I start a foundation where I can help more kids? And through these connections from my friends in the hedge fund world and through other connections, I talked to a bunch of attorneys and tax professionals and estate planning attorneys and guys that were managing the wealth of billionaires, and had their whole family office that they were in charge of. And they showed me this structure, and, I couldn't afford it at the time. They were super expensive. And so eventually they put me with a junior attorney that showed me the structure and the breakdown and how to implement it. And I put it in place for my family and started working the system myself. And since then we've helped hundreds and hundreds of kids in the foster care community. And
that's awesome.
We've really, it's been really fun because we've partnered with a bunch of companies. Like there's a group in North Carolina called Kinetic Neuroscience. Kinetic Neuroscience was started by Dr. David Hagedorn. He's a Harvard fellow neuroscientist. All right. 30 years as a neuroscientist. He developed this whole concept that, he realized that your gut and your brain are connected, and your gut produces enzymes that travel up your spine, up the vagus nerve in your spine, and tell your brain what chemicals to release. So when you feel anxious, nervous, upset, and you got that icky feeling in your gut, that's what's going on. That old saying, trust your gut?
Yeah, it's because your gut knows what's going on.
Your gut is your first brain. And so he realized that these soldiers with PTSD, he could treat them not by just doing regular therapy, but by helping to clean out their whole system of all the medications that they had to take, right? And all of that stuff, because it was wrecking their gut and sending the wrong signals up to their brain.
That's crazy.
And so we partnered with him because I was like, man, do you think that's that same kind of philosophy, same kind of process that he followed with soldiers? Do you think that could help these kiddos in foster care? And he was like, absolutely. The brain reacts the exact same way to trauma and stress. And so we partnered with him, and that allowed us to develop a whole kit or a process, a protocol for parents with foster kiddos that are having these kind of reactions. And so our foundation has been able to send those kits out to those parents and support them in their process of fostering these kids,
That's
so
awesome.
The mission of our foundation kind of grew from just helping the kids to then serving those who are serving the kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. The whole story, and definitely the head to gut thing is really interesting.
It's been fascinating.
I had talked with on my last episode. I had another fellow apogee guy. He lives in India. His name is Aditya, and I had him on here, and we were talking about your head and your gut on a more spiritual level. And
Interesting.
when you talk about it on a scientific level, and it all boils down to the same kind of thing. It's really, really interesting to think about, because it's like all these spiritual things, and then they have this, and then when you look at it from a scientific point of view, and it's the same. It's like, like these things are
spiritually, if you think about it, all of the negative thoughts that we have in our head, and all of those stories we tell ourselves about how dumb we are, how bad we are, all of that is triggered from that anxiety, that feeling, that ickiness. And all that is a chemical, cortisol or norepinephrine or whatever chemical, it's dumped into your system, right? That makes you feel that dread, that ickiness.
Yeah.
And that all comes from your gut. Your gut tells your brain which chemicals to release. So if you can clean out your gut and eat right and get a lot of good sleep and, exercise and do all that stuff and really take care of your system, most of the problems that people have with stress, anxiety, depression, all of that stuff starts to slowly change and go away. It's like the clouds get lifted and things get clearer.
Yeah.
And it's all has to do with gut health first and foremost. Of course, there's other modalities and stuff. Like with the kiddos, we do a lot of bilateral stimulation, which is fascinating, because we're overly stimulated in our society today with these devices and everything that we see and do. Just the noises of the day, the visual input that we see on TV or screens or anywhere, it's just overstimulating our system. It's creating our brains to go into that lizard brain mode more and more. And it goes off kind of like a nuclear bomb, right? When that happens, it shuts down your frontal lobe, which is responsible for all that upper level executive function and thought processing and relationships and connection and love and all that good stuff that we want, right? That's all in the frontal lobe. Well, because of the overstimulation in your lizard brain trying to absorb it all, your frontal lobe shuts down and we can't connect to each other. So even though we're on Zoom like this, it's not the same as if we were sitting down face to face connecting,
Yeah, it's very different. And
it's
noticed
a different
that
experience in your brain too. Your brain interprets it differently. So bilateral stimulation, what it does is it interrupts the brain patterns, relaxes that lizard brain, and allows you to engage that frontal lobe again. It literally rewires your brain.
That's insane.
And so we do it where, it can be intense, where you're wearing these goggles that have strobe lights in them and these earplugs with this bilateral sound, this audio that goes, and all it's doing is interrupting those brain patterns and getting your brain to relax and rewiring it.
That's crazy. And it sounds like something out of like a sci-fi movie, It feels like, what's that movie? Is it Total Recall with Arnold? Yep. Oh, totally. Sounds like something out of that movie.
So the brain can get rewired. What's really cool is that all of this trauma that these soldiers go through and these kids go through, or anybody in the situation, think about all these kids that are being trafficked across the border, the trauma that they're going through, that can be healed. And the way to heal that is through connection. The way to connect to people is to relax your lizard brain and get out of that fight or flight mode in that loop so that you can think and connect and empathize, actually put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Yeah.
Right? And once we can do that, the brain starts to heal itself from trauma. So whether it's foster kiddos or kids that are human trafficked or adults that are human trafficked or soldiers with PTSD, everybody can be cured now. We know the process of curing people. Dr. Hagedorn has 100% success rate with soldiers. It just depends on how long you have to go through the treatment.
That's awesome. So, 100% success rate in anything means you're doing something right.
Yeah,
That's
it's
really crazy.
literally, and it's varying degrees for some people. Some people are never going to quite connect 100% with anybody because that's just not their personality type, you know.
Totally.
But at least they have that option, you know. When they're in a room, they're not scanning for threats. They're kind of listening in and participating in the conversation, you know.
Totally. Yeah,
So
that's really cool though. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
So there's a lot of work like that we're able to do with the foundation because we're able to keep our tax dollars, you know? And
yeah,
so
it's
that
interesting
was the
because
structure, that we kind of discovered.
yeah,
Sorry,
because
I'm
if you
talking
think
over you.
about it, no, it's totally good. If you think about just like every business or every foundation, everything, things, everything that people want to do, a lot of it comes down to funds.
Sure.
And one of the biggest things is if you're not making stupid decisions, the biggest thing that makes you lose money is taxes.
Sure. It's the number one
And
expense that business owners and entrepreneurs face, always is.
yeah. And if you look at, like you're saying, the wealth, the top of the top, if they're using something different than everyone else, that explains why they're the top of the top, because they per the amount they make, they have more funds than everybody else.
You think, well, they make so much more than us. That's why they're able to do that. But what if it was something different?
I meant what I was saying is percentage wise.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, they're able to keep what they make.
There's tax brackets, but like just in general, let's say someone else made the same amount of money.
Yeah.
But these people are using a different system.
Right.
It's going to be a different amount of money that they end up with.
Right. And so this system was created at the exact same time in 1913 when the IRS was formed in our country to collect taxes for the Treasury. They came to the wealthiest families, the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, the Vanderbilts, and they said, we got to collect tax. It's only 1%. And it's only on income earners that made $20,000 a year or more, which is the equivalent of like $500,000 a year or more today. So it was only those wealthy people, right? They were making that kind of money. And it was only 1%. And those wealthy families said, no, we're not going to do that. And so they went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to tax people based on their ownership. So if you want to own these businesses and own the income and revenue from the businesses, then we're going to tax you on it. But if you give up ownership and you take care of society, meaning you give back to society, then we'll leave you alone. But you've got to follow this code and you've got to give up ownership of everything to a trust or another entity that's for the benefit of society or the benefit of someone else. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's kind of why, is that why all of these, it feels like all these wealthy people, you look at all these people and they're like, philanthropy. Let's start our own foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and just dump money in there.
Yeah. So you start to recognize patterns, right? You start to see things pretty clearly. Like in, 2000, when Microsoft was under investigation by the IRS, Bill was going to jail. Okay. And he met Warren Buffett for the first time. They met for the first time at a conference and they became best friends. Well, Warren Buffett taught Bill Gates this structure. 6 weeks later, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was set up. And Warren Buffett pledged $34 billion to start funding the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Interesting.
And then you ask the next question. Well, what did they do with the $34 billion? That's a lot of money. And you look at the tax returns of the foundation and you realize that they invested it all in a little known company called Berkshire Hathaway. And now it's all tax free. And so you start to look at that stuff and drill down and go, and then you see them creating this network of billionaires that they make them all sign this thing called the Giving Pledge. Have you heard of the Giving Pledge?
No, I have not.
So it's this network of billionaires that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett started, where billionaires are pledging to give away their fortune during their lifetime to charity. But again, when you open the kimono and you pull back the curtain and you look and see what charities are they giving it to, it's their own private family foundations, their own 501c3s. And then when you look even deeper at what those 501c3s, those non-government organizations, they call them NGOs, non-governmental organizations.
Yeah.
And you put on your conspiracy hat,
your tinfoil hat, and you
start to see that these elections, in 2020, the elections were funded primarily by these NGOs, these 501c3s. Then it really starts to make you wonder what the heck is going on at that elite level, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is, it's exactly what you think it is. It's exactly what you think it is. The wealthy elite control the politicians, and they control the entire system, you know?
Yeah.
But here's the cool thing. If you start to learn what the rules of the game are, you can play a whole different game. You don't have to be stuck here with everybody else, you know?
Kind of like what Matt Bedreau talks about with the school system. If you just start, if you learn the game, you can start playing a different one.
Yes. You know, it's no different than football players. I was talking to a couple of NFL players that are going to be doing this as well, the structure, because you see all these high level NFL players, they all have foundations, right? These charities.
Yes.
And so these guys are like, how are they doing this? So I'm going to show them how to pull it off and do it.
That's really cool.
But it's, you know, it's the same. It's no different. I was telling them, the guys in the game who understand the rules of the game better than the rookies, they have a distinct advantage, right? I mean, you have an advantage. If you really understand what the rules of the game are better than other people, you've got an advantage to the game. That's all we're talking about doing. And so with that book and my company, what we do now is with Kind Foundation is we serve those who are serving others. And so we've been able to do things like we've created a scholarship fund for Apogee Schools, for Tim Kennedy's school. And he put me in charge of that. So I'm in charge of the school scholarship fund. I was just talking to him last week. We're going to be doing a lot more cool stuff.
Cool.
I got, Black Rifle Coffee wanted to make a big foam check to Apogee School Scholarship Fund. And so, of course, they had to do it to our foundation through our foundation to Apogee Scholarship Fund. But, Tim and Black Rifle Coffee were up there talking about it and doing all their marketing and doing all the Instagram pictures and all that stuff. But it was really, really cool to be a part of that. Right. Yeah. And so afterward, I started just helping out the guys at Black Rifle with their fund because I know this stuff. This is my business. This is what I do. Right. Yeah. And so when they had questions, I was always, answering their question and sending them the right document and saying, fill it out this way, make sure you record this stuff, showing them how to do this. And so last week I got a text from them. They've asked me to be on their board of directors for the fund.
That's awesome.
So all of this stuff, because I just wanted to figure out, how do I help more kids? Right? How do I build this business, make a bunch of money so that I can help more kids? Which is a different mindset than most people, right?
Yeah, most people are like, how can I get the most money so I can have the most fun?
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to have the most fun?
Sure.
But then it's like the second you turn your focus towards your goal being not to buy the Lambo, but something important like helping kids who need places to live.
Yep.
And then it completely changes your mindset because deep down that this Lambo doesn't mean anything. But the second you start doing stuff for these kids and you're like, this is changing the structure of their lives.
Changes their whole life. If you can positively help one kid in this world, this crazy world right now, I mean, you never know. I saw a great video. My wife and I, we adopted two little girls. We've got a 14-year-old girl named Caitlin. We have an 8-year-old girl named Emery and a 7-year-old named Savannah that we had through IVF. So we tried in vitro fertilization a bunch of times and it failed and didn't work. And the last time it finally worked, and that's Savannah. So we've got 3 little girls, but 2 of them were adopted from traumatic situations. Caitlin, we got her when she was 3 years old. She was rescued from a meth lab here in Austin, Texas. The SWAT team surrounded the building, busted down the door, arrested her mother, arrested the boyfriend. The grandfather pulled up in a stolen vehicle with drugs and money on him while they were making the arrests. And so it was just this traumatic event, right? Well, she's been dealing with that trauma ever since. And so she's in boarding school right now, in a therapeutic boarding school where they understand how to heal this kind of trauma, And so she's getting the constant attention that she needs, plus the school structure, and she's able to learn and do, keep up with school as well. It's more of the traditional government type of a model, but unfortunately. But what we're doing with Tim Kennedy is Apogee School is going to be, the lower school, ages 6 to 12, the middle school, there's going to be a high school, and then also Apogee U, which is going to be just like the Apogee Strong model, where it's all volunteers. Guys like me will be teaching money and finance, a course on money and finance. And so in my course, you'll learn how to make money, keep money, grow money, and give money. By the time you're done, you'll be making money and you'll be saving money, So
that's totally
it's real world application kind of stuff. And then off these tangents, as we go down this path, this roadmap, and this is with Matt and Tim, those offshoots that we have are going to be these therapeutic boarding schools for kids with trauma, because I believe in the Apogee model. And I think these kids could really benefit from it, but they still need that extra therapeutic kind of setting, just because they're dealing with a lot of crap in their head. These kids have been through a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
But so they need that safe setting, that consistency, wake up in the same house with the same people and that kind of stuff. But
yeah. One of the things that I was just thinking about, because it's one of my favorite shows and the next season releases this week, or part 1 of the season, is the show Stranger Things, where one of the main characters, 11, goes through like theatrically traumatic events, just insane trauma. And you see in the new trailers some of the crazy stuff that she went through, but it's like the second you get that stability, it changes everything, because you look at just like the plot of that show, but then you apply that to real life, and it's like, it's interesting how many shows are about stuff like that, stories like that.
Mirror life,
And it's like, people love those stories, but it's like, don't just love the story, be the story.
Yeah. Apply it. It's interesting you say that. I was talking to Tim about this with these kiddos and the trauma and the effects of trauma and how it rewires the brain. And he goes, how come I don't have it? And he like was convinced that he doesn't have trauma. And I was like, I think you do. And the way it manifests itself is he's unable to connect fully with people, because he's constantly in overdrive and constantly managing. He's got 6 businesses and, 10 dozens of employees at this point. And it's just insane, but
sounds a little
I think
hectic.
that's his lizard brain on high alert, constantly. He's has a hard time relaxing that. But I think also at the same time, the reason he doesn't have PTSD or trauma from war is because he does have good relationships with a small group of friends. Like his relationships are really, really tight with his good friends, So it goes back to the same thing. That connection can heal that brain trauma,
Yeah, totally. I mean, because you just look at people in general. I mean, there's a lot of things where just being able to connect with someone on a different level than you connect with other people, it just completely, like, totally, like what you're saying, it can really help. because I've even noticed that. And you notice that with people who don't connect with anybody, they're just not fully there, and they're just not happy. But then the second, that's why everybody has one friend that's just like different
Their
than
best
everybody
friend.
else.
Sure.
Because
Or your tribe of friends, that little group.
well, yeah,
that you have.
that group, because you connect with them on a different level than everyone else. So when you're around them, that trauma or whatever, it kind of takes a back seat because you have this really good connection.
Yeah.
And I mean, it may still be there, but having a really solid group of friends just totally helps everything.
It really does. It really does. I think that's the key. And I think, when I study the money and finance, what I do now is I look at countries and how this stuff is affecting everything globally. And I think that we've gotten to this point where we've tried central planning, where government is controlling everything at the center in the whole country. We've tried it for so long, and the weight of it is just going to collapse in on itself. And we always go back to small groups, right? Those small tribes, those small groups, those communities are so critical because it provides safety and security. It relaxes our lizard brain, helps us to connect deeply. And it affects everything in your life. That's why I love the Apogee Strong Group so much, is because what you guys have created together is that tribe of guys that, you've been through so much together that nobody else is going to understand, that hasn't gone through it.
And I definitely think that's what we do at Apogee, and what Matt has done in general, is it's what a lot of men just in general lack, because it feels like you don't really meet that many men who just have a really close group of friends, especially as they get older. It's just like, oh, I see my neighbor every 3 days and we're cool.
Yeah,
and
we're in a society where it's isolating to be a man, a husband, a father, a leader, It's very isolating. You feel alone. You feel disconnected, like nobody's in your corner, Totally. That's happening more and more and more. And I think it's because of, again, it goes back to that. We're so inundated with so much information. It's like the trust level isn't there. We distrust, or there's so much mistrust out there. It's hard to connect,
Yeah.
But it's so isolating. And being a business owner or an entrepreneur, even if you're in high school or a kid that you're trying to create a business, it's so isolating because no one else is doing that, So when you do find those people, it's like, that's what you're feeling. That's when your brain is like, these are my people. All right, we're good. I'm not crazy,
Yeah. Cause when you go to college, you're just with everybody and you've got your group. But the second you decide that I don't want to go to college, I don't want to lose $100,000. I'm going to make $100,000 in the same time you're there. People are like, whoa, what's wrong with you? You're crazy.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's like what the world needs is, it's like a group, like it's kind of what Apogee's done, is it's just a group of like-minded people whose mindset isn't the norm, because it feels like, and a lot of people's mindset isn't the norm, but the norm pushes the mindset onto them.
Mm-hmm. So that's the herd mentality.
Yeah.
Do you remember when we talked about that?
Yeah.
On Apogee?
Totally.
So that's one of the most dangerous things in human history, is that everything negative throughout history is a result of the herd all moving in one direction and nobody really questioning it. That's the other component.
Yeah.
So guys like you and Apogee, you're going the opposite way of the herd, which is why it feels so weird sometimes.
Totally.
When you're going against the herd. And here's another thing, is that as human beings, that herd feels safe and comfortable. And so you're dangerous if you're going the other way.
Yeah.
And my brain is telling me, my lizard brain goes off like a nuclear bomb and says, you're dangerous because you're doing the opposite of what we're doing. And then I start to project, you're crazy. I can't believe you. That's the stupidest mistake you're ever going to make. Worst decision you could ever possibly make. That's just projection. What they're really saying is, I could never do what you're doing. I don't have the guts. I don't have the courage,
Yeah. And look, the biggest thing with herd mentality and stuff is the second you go against it, it's like, because people need a community. But then if the herd is the size of the pen and the size of people going the other way is just the cap, it makes it
The
a
gravitational
lot,
field.
but it makes it a lot harder
Yeah.
to find your group in this cap when you've got, and then there's this big group of people just who
Sure.
are going the complete opposite direction. You've got to like, but then the second you do find it, you're like,
It's like a breath of fresh air.
what was I, yeah. And you're like, what was I doing over here? I needed to be over here this entire time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one thing you hit on just now is more important than anything you're going to learn in school, you know, is really understanding that, hey, I'm not going to just go with the herd just because. I've got to go out. I'm leveling up my game in my whole life. I'm leveling up physically. I'm leveling up spiritually. I'm leveling up with my friendships and my relationships. I'm leveling up with my business and my school when I'm learning. And I'm running with a totally different group. I'm not following these people. When you make that decision in your head, there are people out there. You're going to find your tribe, you know, they're out there.
Definitely.
You've got to just make that decision and go with it, you know?
Yeah. And I think
it's a hard thing to do, but
yeah. And it's the thing, it's where like the second you feel like you're the only one going in the direction you're going, but then the second you find the other people going in the direction you're going, it's a complete and total mental breakthrough, because you go from this again, the fight or flight response, where you're like, I'm the only one, I got to be careful. But then the second you find everyone, it's just like, oh my God.
The first time you're sitting together as a group and you turn to that person next to you and you say, hey, have you ever thought about blah, blah, blah? And they're like, oh, totally, dude. And what about this? And they just add to it. And you're like, yes.
And it's just back and forth. Like, like that's one of the crazy things with me and Kaleo, because he went from a kid who I'd barely connected with to a really close friend in 3 months. And it was because of that we got to talking, and it was like, has this ever happened? Yes. And then it's like, what are you thinking right now? The same thing. It's like, boom.
Yeah, exactly.
Completely different. Yeah.
So when you find those people and you start running with them on a consistent basis and spending more quality time with them and connecting on a daily basis and pouring into their lives and getting them to pour into your life, you know, when you do that, you collapse time and you leapfrog and you hit your goals, your targets 10 times faster. Like your whole life just starts clicking, you know, like in every possible way. It becomes easier. And then there comes a moment where things are happening and you're doing so well that you start questioning, oh man, when's the other shoe going to drop? You know?
Yeah.
That's that lifestyle of an entrepreneur or a business owner. But when you find that tribe, I promise you, if you can hold on to those people and run with them, then they'll push you, you know, they'll push you to be more and do more and suck less, which is the ultimate goal.
Totally. And that's kind of one of the cool things that I found with this podcast is I've like just from connections I have, just found people that I think have something, maybe not fully, but like there's a couple of things where we're totally in the same spot on something. So, and then bringing them on here and getting to talk to them, it's cool to find like where they're at and like really hear their story, because a lot of it's relatable, but then it's like, and then one of the things is I'm like, what I want for this podcast is I want it to get to the point where it's like the people out there who have a different mindset than most other people and who feel like there's no one else with the mindset they can see, and they'll like be like, okay, these 5 guests I connected with really well. So now I have 5 people that I could go reach out to on social media and be like, this is what's going on with me. And I think you might understand because of what I saw here, you know?
100%, dude. I think what you've created is a movement, you know? It's just a concept. It's an idea. It's you talking to your peer group, right?
Yeah.
And being able to relate on that level. Again, they don't want to hear this stuff from their parents or even from me. I'm an old man. I can't relate to what you guys are going through and dealing with today, but you
Yeah,
can. And so they'll
totally.
listen to you. So that becomes a pretty powerful platform, and the message
Definitely.
is clear.
Yeah.
They're right now, they're going through, like Matt says, the McDonald's style educational process. They're learning the same thing as everybody next to them, and nobody in their class wants to do anything. They've checked out. They don't care. They're just doing it because they have to. Nobody's there because they want to. Yet there are a couple of people in that school that they're like, God, I wish I could go to a school where everybody wanted to be here and learn and helped each other out. And,
Totally.
and that could be, you could be leading them to the promised land.
Yeah. And like, that's one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is like so many of these podcasts and so many of these things where they're highlighting stuff going on in the world, like the biggest podcast in the world, the Joe Rogan Experience.
Mm-hmm.
That podcast appeals to an audience to make them feel like-minded, but there's no one doing it. There's no teens doing it for teens. You might see some adult doing it for a teen, but like, what the heck does some 47-year-old mom
boring.
know about what's going on? So it's like, it's something that the world definitely needs is like more people just doing stuff for their people, but like putting it public, because if I have a group of friends and I'm talking to them about the subject, I should totally just bring it onto the podcast.
Yep.
Because then it's not just these, say, 5 people. The amount of people that can see it goes exponential.
You're adding value.
Yeah.
Anytime you can add value, that's a huge thing,
Definitely.
So when you're adding value to people's lives, that's when they start to follow you. That's when you start to build your audience, your tribe,
Yeah.
There's a great book out there. It's called Tribes by, what is his name? Seth Godin. And he talks about this. He's like, the world's getting so big, the internet's so big. And, if you think social media now is so big that people feel alone, isolated, disconnected, even though it's supposed to be connecting us. And so they're all going back to these small groups again, these small tribes. These, a lot of them are creating their own app that's a private app for their community, right? That's kind of the trend in software, is those community apps to build out your community. That's just small groups because people they don't want to get lost in the masses. They want to be with their people.
Yeah.
So you speaking this way and being that light, you're going to be leading people. Your tribe is going to be following you. You're going to find those people.
Definitely.
And you're going to be adding a ton of value to their lives. They're going to be like, holy crap, where's this guy been? Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that's really interesting is because some people are like, if I talk, it's going to be horrible. And even looking at my first episode, my graphics were horrible. It looked like I was playing video games by the way the like colors were. It was all bright. And then as things kind of shifted into view, when I talked to Aditya a couple weeks ago, it was like, now I know what I want to do, where I want to take this. But what I think a lot of people think is I need to know exactly what I want to do before I do it. Yeah. Just start doing it because I thought I knew what I wanted to do with the podcast. And then like even just on this call, what I want to do with the podcast has evolved. Like, do you think that since Joe Rogan started his podcast, he's been doing everything the same way?
And what's interesting is he hasn't taken down those old ones that looked horrible, where it was in a horrible setting and they didn't know what they were doing, right? Because people want to see that evolution of you. They want to see the journey. Yeah. That's how trust is built. People don't trust you if you're perfect. So if you're overproduced, if you're perfect, that's not going to resonate with anybody. They want real and authentic. And so definitely keep those old videos up. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. You're expanding and growing and changing and adapting. And it's really cool to see, Yeah,
totally.
Your tribe is going to be following you. They're going to be, it's going to be like an oasis, water when they're in the desert. They're going to be like running to you after a while. So
Yeah.
as long as you keep adding value, just keep showing up and adding value like you're doing.
Totally. And that's why my goal right now is to because I haven't been very consistent with episodes. It's just kind of been, can I get someone lined up? And now I'm trying to at least get 4 episodes out in June, release them once a week on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
So I'm really trying to get that going, because then it's a consistent thing. And then then the podcast will start to grow, and it won't just be the people that I send it out to. It'll be the people where it's like, now as it starts to grow, and then eventually once it gets big enough, then I'll get to see like people and then when people start being like, this podcast is great, I'll be like, hey, do you want to come on? Because if you like the podcast, you're like-minded. So then again, the growth is exponential.
It is. It'll snowball.
Yeah.
I started doing jujitsu with Tim at his new place, and I'm a white belt. I know less than nothing, but the black belts roll with us, and it's a really cool experience, and we're learning tons. And this guy told me one time, he goes, you know what the difference between a white belt and a black belt is? And I said, what? And he goes, a black belt is a white belt that just kept coming. He's like, keep showing up.
Yeah.
Or a black belt is a white belt that didn't know when to quit,
Totally.
So it'll just start building on itself organically.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll be good.
I think that's
so. I
kind of
hope I've added value today.
Oh,
did I answer your questions?
Oh yeah, this has been great. I mean,
cool.
Yeah. So I think we can just kind of wrap it up here.
Awesome.
This has been my interview with Sean Briscombe. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be back next Wednesday, and this has been The Conversation Station.